Professor, Faculty of Health Sciences, University of Ottawa. Dr. Deonandan, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Just your initial reaction when you heard Premier Doug Ford talk about the third vaccine.
It's not unexpected that it was going to happen eventually. I'm a little surprised it's happening so soon, though.
And why is that? Because the so soon, we had talked, and we've talked before, Raywat, that maybe next year people might be looking at booster shots. But expand on that idea of this happening this quickly.
Right. So this is triggered by some data coming out of Israel and a little bit out of the USA, where the vaccine efficacy seems to be declining. And that's not unexpected. Vaccines always decline in effectiveness over a period of time because the titers of measured antibody production decline over time as well. It's unclear whether that decline in antibody production is associated with an actual decline in protection, though. However, that seems to be observed in Israel, which started vaccinating before we did, and in the USA, that also started vaccinating before we did. But it's more noticeable among certain groups, the elderly and the immunocompromised. So for those groups, it kind of makes sense to explore the opportunity to sort of supercharge immunity now. But for the rest of us, it looks like we have sufficient protection still to ward off the worst of this disease. So we can keep the epidemic in check with the existing amounts of immunity offered by 2 doses. So it seems a bit premature to me to be looking at 3 doses for everybody right now. But next year seems another story entirely.
And I should be clear, because in the announcement yesterday, it would appear that it was going to be for high-risk groups. So at this point, it doesn't sound like Ontario would be doing a broad third vaccination. Is that clear?
That's clear. And now it's important to look at the details. We see that the decline in immunity happens amongst those who are immunocompromised and those less likely to mount a strong immune response to begin with. So that usually means the elderly, and amongst those who had a short interdose interval. So for those who the period between the first dose and the second dose was just 3 weeks or so. For most of us, thank you, Nassi, it's been 8 weeks or more. And it seems that 8 weeks is the sweet spot. You get a lot more immunity that way, more durable immunity. So Canada in general is better positioned than Israel and the USA because we have that long interdose interval. So I wouldn't be surprised if we can endure with just 2 doses for much longer than those 2 countries.
And that ultimately would come from NACI if they look at the data to say whether or not it should be broader or just for the high-risk groups?
It should come from NACI. NACI has no legal power here. They just recommend things, but they are our best vaccine experts, and they haven't guided us wrong to this point. They've had some bad communication for sure, but ultimately their advice has been pretty spot on throughout this pandemic.
Do we have to be concerned, though, that we're even talking about third shots when there are many countries that are struggling to get a vaccine supply for first and second doses?
Absolutely. Dr. Mike Ryan of the WHO said it best. He says, we're talking about throwing a life jacket to people who already have life jackets before giving life jackets to people who are drowning with no life jackets. So this is a global pandemic, as we all know. And the production of variants, the hell that we're all going to be in for some time is happening because most of the world has no vaccines. The faster we can get some vaccine to most of the world, the faster much of this crisis goes away. It should be in our priority right now to vaccinate the world, and not just us.
Still on the third shot, you've obviously heard what Saskatchewan is doing. They're offering a third vaccine dose for international travel because of this controversy that we are still in the middle of as to whether or not countries will accept Canadians if they have a combination of vaccines. So Saskatchewan is offering a third shot to say if you want to have both of them being Pfizer or both of them being Moderna. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not needed, but if it's a administrative solution to a problem that shouldn't exist, fine. It only affects a handful of people, really. Those people who got the mixed doses and who are choosing to travel. That's not a lot of people in the grand scheme of things, so it doesn't rub me the wrong way. So long as we are looking at the rest of the world, the billions of people around the rest of the world who need a first dose.
Clarify something for me, because not surprisingly, the whole issue of vaccines and vaccine passports has become a political issue. But ultimately, the decision on any passports does that still not rest with the provinces? I mean, the federal government has the vaccines; they distribute it to the provinces. But I'm not surprised it's a political issue, but I'm wondering if it should be.
Interesting. That's a loaded question. I'm not sure what I can offer
Yeah,
there as an epidemiologist,
yeah,
but my understanding is that it's the provinces who can deploy these tools domestically for access
yeah.
to services like movie theaters and indoor dining. The federal government's job is to monitor and to control people coming in and out of the country so they can offer the actual vaccine passports for travel. Also, the federal government can offer a tool. So they could create a national, database or electronic tool that can be used by the provinces who wish to start using a vaccine passport domestically. So there are roles for everybody to play here. Whether or not it'll be successful, I think that kind of thing can be successful, most importantly, as an incentive for the apathetic to seek vaccination. That's where it's most powerful, as an incentive.
See, with COVID, it crosses so many lines, from epidemiologists having to make comments on political issues, economic issues, and I'm glad you were there for us, Dr. Deonandan. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Dr. Raywat Deonandan.